Let me introduce you to a rule most people never learn. Mental speed is irrelevant. If you're running in the wrong direction, you can be twice as fast, twice as motivated, and still lose to someone twice as slow if their thinking is calibrated while yours is corrupted. And most minds today, they're not slow. They're misaligned, built on decades of emotional noise, inherited fears, and outdated thinking patterns. That's why this algorithm is not based on speed. It's based on mental trajectory correction. The first module, cognitive clarity. The smarter mind strips story, not because it's emotionless, but because it's allergic to distortion. You've been trained to think in stories. I was betrayed. Abandoned me. They ruined everything. But these aren't facts. They're dramatized edits. Your brain is addicted to drama because drama feels alive. But aliveness isn't clarity. It's noise. The smarter mind doesn't say, I was hurt. It says an expectation collapsed. It doesn't say they used me. It says a miscalculated pattern repeated. You see the difference? One traps you in emotion. The other opens the door to mastery. Most people don't want truth. They want a story where they are the hero or the victim. But intelligence isn't about being the main character. It's about deleting the character altogether so you can see the raw structure of reality. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clean. No fog, no fiction, just signal. When you stop narrating, you start noticing. And in that silence, data speaks. Suddenly, you realize you weren't rejected. You were redirected. You weren't betrayed. You were misaligned. You weren't cursed. You were taught. It's not about being heartless. It's about seeing without hallucination. Your ego will resist this. It wants to be the center of a tragic movie. It wants to feel special, even if that means staying in pain. But the intelligent mind knows better. It doesn't need a story to feel complete. It just needs truth. Unedited, unfiltered, unromanticized. Because the moment you delete the narrative, you don't just see reality more clearly. You move through it like a ghost. Unstuck, unshaken, unstoppable. Too cognitive. Velocity mapping. Most people don't realize this. Your brain is not just thinking. It's racing toward a conclusion, toward the comfort of I. No, but intelligence isn't measured by how fast you reach an answer. It's measured by how long you can stay in the tension of the unknown without flinching. Cognitive velocity is your internal stopwatch. Not to rush thought, but to observe it. You track how quickly your mind tries to end the discomfort of uncertainty. You examine the micro moments where your brain rushes to define, to label, to resolve. And instead of indulging that speed, you slow it down. You feel the impulse to label someone as wrong, and you wait. You feel the urge to defend your opinion, and you don't. You learn to stretch the gray zone. The genius mind isn't obsessed with being correct. It's obsessed with being precise. And precision demands time. Time to absorb patterns. Time to see contradictions. Time to let truth reveal itself, not be forced out of panic. The amateur fills silence with opinion. The expert watches the silence for anomaly. You stop reacting to the loudest idea. You start noticing what hasn't been said. That gap between thought and conclusion is where innovation begins. This is not indecision. It's deliberate incompleteness, a conscious refusal to rush the mind's process. You train yourself to be the last one to speak, not to be passive, but to be precise. Because while the world honors fast talkers, it quietly obeys those who think like surgeons, slow, sharp, surgical. And when your cognitive velocity drops low enough, you don't just answer better. You start seeing what others can't even perceive. Third concept, reversal training. Most minds are followers of thought. They inherit frameworks, then defend them like religion. But the dangerous mind, it does something different. It reverses instinct. When the world says this is success, you ask, what if that's failure in disguise? When they say he's confident because he dominates, you ask, what if true confidence is the ability to disappear and still control the room? This isn't about being a contrarian. It's about building cognitive inversion, a mental muscle that doesn't cling to patterns but interrogates them, tears them open, rebuilds them backward. Because here's the secret. Intelligence is not just creation, it's demolition. You take the accepted path and cut it in half. You take a belief and flip it until it breaks. You take an assumption and inject it with its opposite until it either shatters or transforms. Why? Because most people live in conceptual cages, invisible boxes made from ideas they never questioned. You walk in with a mental sledgehammer. This isn't comfortable. It requires warping your own lens. But it's necessary because real intelligence isn't polite. It's invasive. While the average mind upgrades by adding more knowledge, you upgrade by subtracting assumptions. Most people fear being wrong. You hunt for it because you know every flawed assumption you destroy becomes a new foundation. And here's what they won't tell you. The most adaptable minds on Earth don't learn more. They flip faster. They can look at any system, emotional, political, strategic, and instantly see what it would become if reversed. That's not just intelligence. That's mental insurgency. You're not following the rules of the game. You're reverse engineering the game itself. And that is when you stop being predictable and start becoming dangerous. For narrative deletion protocol, your brain doesn't remember life. It rewrites it, not as raw data, but as drama. Every event is run through a silent filter. A filter made of wounds, wants, and warped memory. She didn't walk away. She abandoned you. You didn't lose a job. You were humiliated. You weren't corrected. You were disrespected. The event is neutral, but the story your mind tells about it, that's where the infection begins. Narrative is emotional malware. It feels like clarity, but it's distortion wrapped in familiarity. This protocol trains you to detect it, to isolate it, to delete it. You start asking what actually happened without the adjectives. What am I adding that doesn't belong? Because behind every narrative is an ego fighting for significance. It wants to be the victim, the hero, the martyr, the genius, the misunderstood one. But intelligence doesn't want to feel right. It wants to see right. So you rip out the story, and all that's left is signal. Left. That's all. You made a decision. It didn't work. That's it. No shame, no symbolism. No theatrical monologue. Running in the background. Just clean data. Just facts. And when you process reality without narrative, you stop reliving pain. You start refining perception, because stories aren't just illusions. They're loops. They trap you in cycles of self-reinforcement. Over time, you begin to believe your own edits, and that's when you become blind. But when you delete the story layer, you don't become cold. You become precise. You're not detaching from emotion. You're detaching from the emotional fiction. And only then can you finally see what happened, not how it felt, but what it was. That's not numbness. That's psychological sovereignty. 5. Mirror. Neuron override. Your nervous system wasn't built for sovereignty. It was built for survival within a tribe. You mirror the tribe's stress. You reflect their fear. You copy their tension, not because you're weak, but because evolution hardwired your neurons to sync with the emotional temperature around you. That's why you feel tired around unmotivated people. Why anxiety spreads through a room without a single word. Why one person's rage can ignite yours. It's not spiritual, it's neurological. Mirror neurons, tiny biological spies, constantly watching others and replicating them inside you. But here's what the average mind never learns. You can turn the signal off. The elite thinker doesn't just react slower, they disconnect entirely. You train yourself to become emotionally distincted, a ghost within the social matrix. How? You compress your facial micro-expressions until they reveal nothing. You anchor your gaze not on people's eyes but just past them, removing yourself from their emotional current. You lower your breathing into the diaphragm so your voice remains deep, calm, and slow, immune to spikes. These aren't tricks. They're neurological countermeasures, because once your nervous system stops echoing others, you become psychologically invisible. You walk into a room full of chaos and feel nothing. You hear panic in someone's voice and your pulse doesn't change. You witness emotional outbursts and your cognition stays clean, cold, sharp. This isn't about becoming robotic. It's about reclaiming your mental sovereignty. Because the person who can feel everything is easily manipulated. But the one who can feel without absorbing, that person becomes ungovernable. You weren't born to be a mirror. You were born to be a firewall. And once you override that mirror neuron system, the world's noise longer controls your signal. You don't adapt to the room. The room adapts to you. Strategic reality collapse. You think you see the world, but what you actually see is pre-installed language, words, meanings, definitions downloaded into your mind. Before you could reject them, you were told what success is, what love means, what failure, confidence, intelligence, even reality itself should look like. But here's the brutal truth. Most people are not living in the world. They're living inside a simulation built by other people's expectations, their parents, their culture, their trauma, their society's insecurities disguised as values. You don't see what is. You see what you were taught to see. That's why the intelligent mind initiates a full collapse. Strategic, surgical, brutal. You question every inherited definition until it crumbles under its own weight. You don't just redefine success. You delete the old word entirely. Career becomes leverage. Execution architecture. Confidence becomes emotional control under volatile conditions. Failure becomes tactical. Feedback iteration. Love becomes a neurochemical contract enforced by illusion. Truth becomes what remains. After every belief has been burned, you no longer borrow reality. You build it, line by line like code. And here's what happens when the collapse is complete. Your brain stops reacting to old symbols. It no longer lights up at praise, at approval, at guilt, at shame, because those were responses written for an identity that no longer exists. Now, you respond with design. You interpret with precision. You act with internal logic, not inherited myth. You are not playing society's game. You are writing your own simulation with rules that obey strategy, not tradition. This isn't rebellion. This is reprogramming. Once your operating system is clean, every word becomes a weapon. Every meaning becomes yours. And reality finally becomes negotiable. So you've stripped the narrative. You've overridden mimicry. You've collapsed the inherited version of reality. Now we go further into the mental weaponry most minds will never encounter. This is where the algorithm shifts from intelligence to tactical dominance. Before we unlock the next layer, I want to introduce you to a system that was never meant to be written. It's not an ebook. It's a war path disguised as a blueprint. Whispers cognitive overclock. The forbidden 90-day manual for rewriting the mind they trained you to protect. This is not motivational fluff, not recycled productivity advice. This is psychological warfare against comfort, distraction, and internal weakness. Inside this ebook, you'll enter a 90-day assault against the soft mind. Cold focus rituals to force your brain to operate under pressure. Neural endurance training to expand your cognitive threshold. Flow state engineering to trigger ruthless focus at will. Dopamine warfare protocols to crush shallow pleasure addiction. Strategic fatigue and recovery loops to sharpen your mental blade. And the full overclock blueprint to install permanent mental dominance. This ebook doesn't just teach, it transforms. It is built to destroy who you are and forge what you were meant to become. If you're ready to enter the 90-day war, then download Whisper's Cognitive Overclock now. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want access to the full vault of forbidden psychological tools, dark intelligence, emotional detachment, cognitive manipulation, then the Whisper's Power Bundle is waiting for you when you're ready. The link is in the pinned comment. Begin the war. 7. Perceptual weaponization. Most people observe the world passively. They see, but they don't influence. Their eyes absorb, but their mind remains neutral. You train your vision into a strategic weapon, because here's the secret. The world doesn't run on facts. It runs on frames. And the person who frames the situation controls the outcome. If you can define what's being seen, you define how others feel. And if you can shape what they feel, you shape what they do. This is perceptual dominance, not by speaking louder, but by watching deeper. You learn to speak only after scanning facial micro twitches, breath rhythms, pupil dilation, noticing where their attention breaks, where their confidence leaks, where their mask slips, and instead of Reacting, you anchor. You hold stillness, so precise it becomes gravitational. Because movement chases attention, stillness commands it. Then you aim your words, not at their words, but at their subtext. You ask the questions they were avoiding. You reflect their emotion back to them without judgment, just data. You don't confront, you reveal. You become a lens, not a mirror. They don't see themselves in you. They see themselves because of you. And that's when everything flips. Your presence begins to edit the behavior of the room. They speak more carefully. They shift their posture. They explain things they normally conceal just to feel seen. Not because you intimidated them, but because your gaze made their own mask unbearable. This isn't charisma. It's perceptual warfare. Because when others feel psychologically naked in your presence, you don't have to assert power. They surrender it. And once you own the frame, you don't follow reality. You rewrite it. 8. Time compression. Thinking. The average person wastes time, not because they're lazy, but because they believe there's more. They act like time is a renewable currency, as if the future will always stretch far enough to fix today's delay. But here's the truth. Time doesn't run out. It collapses quietly, violently, without warning. The smarter mind doesn't live in years. It lives in decision loops, tiny cycles of clarity and execution that stack into massive advantage. You don't ask, how much time do I have? You ask, how many cycles can I run? Before they blink, your day becomes a mental battlefield. Every task gets 2 options. Execute in 2 minutes or reject in 10 seconds. No negotiation. No emotional buffering. You either build or you discard. Conversations are filtered through precision. Does this build leverage? Does this reveal truth? Does this redirect momentum? If not, it dies in your mind before it steals your energy. You stop attending meetings that don't move a needle. You stop arguing over ideas that don't reshape outcomes. You stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to reaffirm their ego. Because you no longer operate on clock time. You operate on mental efficiency per second. This is how the younger mind beats the experienced one. Not by accumulating more knowledge, but by compressing distance between thought and outcome. You don't run faster, you cut the distance. You don't panic. You prioritize with surgical brutality. While others are still stuck in monthly goals and 5-year plans, you're looping decisions, extracting insights, and adapting mid-con conversation. This is not hustle. It's temporal warfare. You are shrinking time into action. And when you do that, you bend reality forward at a pace most people mistake for genius. 9. Tactical identity engineering. You were told to be yourself, but no one told you that yourself is a construction site, not a discovery. The average person wanders through life waiting to find who they are. The elite, they design who they must become, because identity isn't a soul. It's strategy in motion. You are not a fixed self. You are a response system. And responses can be engineered. You begin by asking, what traits dismantle manipulators before they act? What tone makes chaos lose its footing? What posture turns criticism into self-reflection in others? What presence makes people second-guess attacking me? You stop identifying with your past. You stop defending your default personality. You realize your current self was built by accident, by childhood, by trauma, by social feedback loops. Now you build on purpose. You don't ask, who am I? You ask, what identity wins in this environment? And then you code that identity. Maybe you need to become colder. Maybe you need to become funnier. Maybe you need to eliminate softness from your voice or refine the chaos in your energy. It's not about being fake. It's about being tailored. You're not here to express your raw self. You're here to deploy the most effective version of yourself in the psychological battlefield you occupy. You become someone who walks into a room and changes the emotional algorithm just by standing still. No wasted movements, no needless words, no leaky energy. You are no longer reacting to the world. You are redesigning your interface with it. Because when your identity is engineered tactically, you don't just survive the game, you reprogram it. By now, your mind has been rewritten. But intelligence is useless unless it holds under pressure, unless it can function when sleep-deprived, when insulted, when you're being underestimated or pulled into chaos. This part of the algorithm doesn't sharpen your mind. It forges it into a weapon that stays sharp under fire. This is where the smart become untouchable. 10th Cognitive Asymmetry Protocol. Most people fight in straight lines. Their logic is linear, their arguments predictable, their reactions rehearsed, and that's why they lose. Not because they're dumb, but because they're symmetrical. Cognitive symmetry is the death of strategic advantage. It puts you on the same battlefield as everyone else. Same assumptions, same tempo, same blind spots. But the elite mind doesn't play that game. It thinks sideways. It bends logic. It weaponizes silence. They speak. You pause. They press. You retreat strategically. They expect fire. And you hand them a mirror. Cognitive asymmetry means you don't react where they expect. You don't play by the emotional rules they understand. Instead of arguing facts, you ask a question that scrambles their foundation. Instead of defending yourself, you reframe the entire discussion. Instead of trying to win the point, you collapse the context in which the point exists. You corner them not by overpowering them, but by letting their own logic implode. They say you're wrong. You say, what would you need to see to be right? Now they have to define proof. Now they are boxed. Now you control the frame. This isn't about debate. This is neurological redirection. Because the smartest fighter isn't the one with more force. It's the one whose rhythm can't be tracked, whose moves aren't answers but traps. You move second, but you control the tempo. You stay calm, but you bend perception. And by the time they realize you were never on the same level, it's already too late. You didn't fight them. You made them fight themselves. That's not just intelligence. That's invisible domination. 11th. Pressure response. Override. Stress doesn't just reveal you. It edits you. Under heat, your voice tightens. Your breath shortens. Your thoughts fragment. You start responding from instinct, not insight. From fear, not structure. From survival, not strategy. Most minds collapse in crisis, not because they're fragile, but Because they were never taught how to think under fire. This isn't about staying calm. It's about overriding your nervous system before it hijacks your cognition. The elite mind installs protocols, slower breathing as pressure rises. It tells your body, we're not dying, we're deciding. Third person, self-dialogue in confrontation. You remove, I'm under attack, and replace it with, he's analyzing tension. It's a psychological disassociation that buys clarity. 5-second spike delay through temporal decoupling. When emotion floods, you don't suppress it. You pause it. You let it rise. Then you move. Because in those 5 seconds, others will speak too soon, make the wrong call, reveal their fear, and you reposition. You're not suppressing your reaction. You're redirecting it into refinement. While others burn fuel, you convert pressure into processing power. This is how you outperform those with more experience, not with more data, but with better response timing under chaos. You don't just survive stress, you weaponize it. Pressure becomes your sharpening stone. Each confrontation, another calibration. Each surge of panic, another drill. And when it becomes automatic, you don't fear confrontation. You feed on it. Because, while others fight not to break, you fight to refocus faster than they can think. And in that razor-thin gap you win. 12. Silence coding. Most people speak to fill space, to prove relevance, to calm their own discomfort with emptiness. But here's the truth. Noise reveals insecurity. Silence reveals control. You're taught intelligence sounds like words, fast talk, quick facts, dominant tone. But true intelligence doesn't express it, compresses. The elite mind speaks in reductions, and in between those reductions is coded silence. Not passive, not peaceful, but precisely engineered. Each pause becomes a psychological disruptor. It breaks the listener's rhythm. It slows their assumptions. It forces them to wait. And while they wait, they reflect. While they reflect, you steer. This is not silence for calm. This is silence for control. You don't answer instantly. You stall their timing. You shift the beat of the exchange. And in that microtemporal shift, their brain lags just enough for you to slip behind their logic. You create discomfort because discomfort opens mental space. And once they're off rhythm, your words land like precision strikes. No fluff, no build-up, just payload. One sentence compressed. Data. One pause, mental reset. One glance, emotional recalibration. You're not just speaking, you're timing. Cognition. Because thought that arrives late is reactive, defensive, weak. But thought that arrives early, that's preemptive, that's surgical, that's tactical dominance. Silence becomes your scalpel, a tool to slow the world down until everyone else is moving in panic. And you are writing the tempo they didn't even know changed. You don't chase attention, you restructure it. And once silence is your weapon, presence becomes your strategy. If you've made it this far, you're not average. You're not scrolling for dopamine. You're here for power, mental power, psychological sovereignty, cognitive weapons. The world was never going to hand you. But here's the brutal truth. Understanding these 12 protocols isn't enough, because knowing them won't change your life. Installing them will. So here's your next move. Comment below which one hit you hardest. Not for attention, but for integration. What you name becomes yours. What you apply rewires you. Like this video if it activated something in your system. And share it with someone who's still thinking like the crowd. Someone who needs to be shaken out of the illusion. And if you want to go deeper, if you want the next layer, where silence becomes strategy, where detachment becomes dominance, where you don't just play the game, you start rewriting it. Then check the pinned comment. There's something waiting for you. Not motivational fluff, but the forbidden frameworks they pray you never find. Because this isn't just content, it's cognitive warfare. And if you're ready to keep going, welcome to the algorithm they can't predict.